Now, it's a tough neighborhood. We've forgotten about Syria and the conflict in Syria, but you are still living with, what is it, almost 1.5 million?
1.3 Syrian refugees.
Million Syrian refugees in Jordan, which is a very large percent when you consider the population of Jordan. Are they ever going to go back? What are you going to be able to have normal relations with Syria and send these refugees back? What happens to Syria?
Well, I think the quick answer is refugees are not going to go back anytime soon. So 1 in 7 Jordanians are Syrian refugees. 1 in 5 Jordanians are refugees because, again, we've been a host to others. And I don't think people understand the massive impact. I mean, we've obviously had regional wars, we've had international economic downturn, the Arab Spring, ISIS, COVID, but the refugees are what really hurt our country. And our people have had to suffer. So unemployment is very high. I know part of it is COVID. We're slowly coming back to the light, but there's legitimate concerns among Jordanians that life has become very hard. The international community has helped, but I think in the best year we got 40%, 45% of what we needed. The rest comes from our budget. The Syrians are like any other place, are in our school system, they're in our healthcare. Over 200,000 Syrians have work permits. So they're part of our society. And if I was a family in Jordan, a Syrian family, and one of the family members says, when are we going back to Syria? What are they going back to? And that takes us to the challenge in our discussions with the United States and the Europeans. Bashar has longevity. You and I have talked about this for many, many years. When people predicted it was going to be several months, I said many years, if ever. And so the regime is there. And so we have to be mature in our thinking. Is it regime change or behavioral change? And if it's behavioral change, then what do we do to come together to talk with the regime? Because everybody else is doing it, but there's no plan at the moment. And the Russians play a vital role. And without talking to the Russians, how are we ever going to have a narrative that takes us towards the light for the Syrian people?
Would it be fair to say that in Syria, the United States and those countries that were trying to oust Assad have essentially lost that struggle, and that the Russians, the Iranians who were backing the Assad government won?
So again, as I said, the regime is there to stay. None of us are talking to each other on what should be a narrative or a dialogue. I obviously understand from many countries their anger and concern of what has happened to the Syrian people. But keeping the status quo where there's continued violence and the Syrian people pay the price, we've lived that for 7 or 8 years. So we have to admit that there is no perfect answer, but moving the dialogue forward in a coordinated way is better than just leaving it as it is.
So does that mean a de facto partition where Assad controls a large part of Syria, but there's a part that's almost a kind of badlands?
I think it's baby steps. And again, it's not just Iranian proxies or the Russians that are there. ISIS is still there. They haven't been, they're defeated but not destroyed. That's something we've got to remember to chew gum and walk at the same time when it comes to this issue. But I think it's looking at the totality. At the moment, is there's such destruction in that country. The importance of building schools, of building hospitals, and giving a light. And it's not going to be anytime soon for Syrian refugees to say, okay, I can go back to something. There's nothing to go back to there. And so that's why I think we want to get away from violence and see if we can't look at rebuilding. A lot of that is going to be linked with political reform as far as I can see. And again, don't forget, and you're aware, the tragedy that is happening in Lebanon. And what happens in Lebanon or Syria are interlinked. With the crisis in Lebanon, and we're on the verge of a humanitarian disaster there, if that hasn't already happened, and the difficulties that the Syrian people are facing, we in Jordan could be facing another wave of refugees, God forbid. So these are issues that we need to deal with. If we ignore them, then it's going to take us by surprise.